We will start today with housing and a story that's becoming typical for, well, some young people who have found themselves locked out of the housing market, particularly Auckland's housing market. Take a look at this report by Fina Owen.
No, we did. Not now.
Early evening in the Auckland suburb of Mount Roskill, and the Barnard family are sitting down to dinner. They've always rented. Buying a house in Auckland is out of the question.
Houses around here go for sort of 800, 900,000, so even around here would just be an impossibility.
Mark and Bridget both teach at tertiary institutions, although not full-time. They're committed to community work and they foster kids.
Even if both of us worked full-time in the same jobs, it would still be incredibly challenging to even get close. I know so many people that work, their guts is out, and they'll never enter this dream. We all work hard.
For another Mount Roskill renter, teacher and Auckland PPTA rep Michael Cabral-Tarry, the home ownership dream in Auckland is also out of reach.
We are very much the definition of middle New Zealand. I'm a teacher, my husband's a nurse. For us to do it in Auckland, we'd be looking at having to save and scrimp and save for 12, 15 years.
You want some more?
Yeah, you can have some more.
Get in there.
Now the Barnards have deliberately chosen to opt out of the so-called Kiwi dream of house ownership.
And it's become a bit of a New Zealand obsession around, this is what you have to do. And the home and garden magazines and the block and all that kind of stuff just fuels this. This is the thing you have to have in order to be successful, but there are so many other ways to live your life that actually is a lot more meaningful and significant.
Michael's concerned about the social impact of long-term renting.
The future, I think it looks a bit bleak, to be honest. It'll be renting, it will be moving out of Auckland, and it's going to mean longer commutes, more motorways, and it's going to mean a lot more accommodation insecurity.
The concern for a city like Auckland is, do you end up having a massive middle miss and a really poor population, a really wealthy population, and the middle class will disappear to where they can find a house.
It's a good time to have a conversation. All right, this dream doesn't work anymore. It was never available to some. Now it's becoming less available to a lot. How do we change that?
All right, I'm going to start first with Grant Robertson on this one. Is it a government's responsibility to make sure that people like that can own a home?
It's painting with a broad brush. From Grant Robertson's point of view, it's really easy to sling mud from the sidelines, isn't it?
Yeah, always.
Yeah.
It's much easier to be in opposition because you're being able to criticise all the time. But the big challenge for him now is that he's got to prove that he's a treasurer, a minister of finance in waiting, which means he's got to stop flinging mud and sound and look like he's got a better plan than National. And I think that the Jacinda effect has been a bit of a surprise to Labour as well, and that they're not really in the position where they recognise that in 6 weeks' time they could be government. And so he's got to be able to say, not working groups, but this is the absolute policies that we're going to go into government with.
Thomas Pryor, this is arguably the best chance he's going to have of being finance minister, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. And I mean, who knows if they are in power, if Grant will stay in that role, if it might go to someone like David Parker or not. But, absolutely, this is, I think, the closest they've been. And I think actually the Jacinda effect has given Labour the momentum they need going into this campaign, and I think the key thing they've done is voters are now listening. I think voters had turned off under Andrew Little. They're now re-engaging. So actually the challenge for Labour and for Grant and for Jacinda is to actually kind of capture that renewed interest and translate it into votes on the 23rd. And to do that, I think we'll need to see a slightly more inspired performance than what we've seen today.
If so, we
at the moment.
Claire, define for me this, without labouring the point about Jacinda. Everyone has said she looks like, potentially, even critics, that she potentially looks like a Prime Minister in waiting. What's the difference between that and Grant Robertson looking like a Finance Minister in waiting? Why is it so different?
Well, the difficulty is that Grant has been occupying that position for a while, and he's basically repeating what Labour had 3 weeks ago. I mean, there's nothing new to his offer, and so he hasn't got that the spark that we've seen in Jacinda, because she is a brand new offering and she is going at it all guns blazing. And so I think it's the difficulty for Labour is that they've got to show that they've got this great energised leader, but that the next tier down, the Grants, the Chris Hipkins, the next tier of their shadow cabinet are just as energised. And voters will, as the campaign goes on, voters will be looking to say, is this the same Labor that we didn't like under Andrew Little, or is this a new Labor? And I think that that's what they've got to focus on over the next month.
Winston Peters, they both came out and basically laughed off his suggestion and dismissed the second one. He's going to be a part in this election one way or the other, isn't he, Efeso? What did you make of what they had to say there?
Yeah, I thought it was good that they could kind of say where they stood on Winston Peters, but at the end of the day, he's going to be kingmaker.
Yes.
We're all calling it right. The polls are indicating that as well. And I think we can play these games because I think more and more it's becoming a bit of a two-horse race with Winston kind of waiting in the background thinking, what will I end up with? And so this has become a real Labor national focus. And so they're going to have to work out very carefully where they stand, and then they'll go in after 23 September and work out exactly what they're going to have to do, if they're going to have to appease Winston or if they can form some kind of minority without him.
It seemed like quite a change in tone, because up until then, no one's really wanted to kick the hornet's nest that is Winston Peters. Did that surprise you, Thomas?
A little bit. I mean, I don't know how much value I put on it. I mean, I think Winston would have been sitting at home watching that with a wry grin, because actually, as much as everything has changed in the last few weeks in this election campaign, really actually very little has changed. You know, so we're just saying he's still in that position to be kingmaker. So I think actually let's see what each party will or won't give up. And I think a really interesting thing for Winston actually is he's quite happy at this, because he wants a binary choice between a Labor New Zealand First government and a National New Zealand First government. He wanted Greens out of the equation. Greens are now largely out of the equation. So actually for him, this has got much simpler and much cleaner, and that's exactly what he wants. So I don't think Winston will be too worried, to be honest.
Wages, that was another point that Corin covered, and as Stephen Joyce pointed out, after tax, the wages are better. The gap is closing. Did Grant Robertson say anything that was going to make you think, well, they have a better plan? Certainly not that I heard.
No, and I think the interesting question was around Australia, because when you go back to 2008, that was one of the really big issues, that New Zealanders were leaving the country in droves to go to Australia. That's definitely stopped, and that's stopped for a variety of reasons. In fact, our problem is the other way around. We've got too many people coming in to New Zealand. So I think the issue of whether we have parity with Australia is no longer an election issue at all.
You did a survey, Massey University did a survey. I just want to go back to this, and one of the points that came up as important to voters was quite surprising. Just tell us what that was.
Well, the housing question?
No, not the housing, was the health question.
Oh, the health question, yeah. But in fact, so Massey and stuff.co.nz did a survey of 40,000 voters in May, and the number one election issue for voters of all ages was actually health. And I think it changes. With young voters, it's more likely to be mental health issues. With older voters, it's about, am I going to get my knee replaced or my hip replaced? But that is the biggest worry for New Zealanders. It doesn't tend to be one of those sexy election issues like housing is. Housing is actually an important election issue for the under 35s, but not the over 40s. And this is where National has an advantage, because most of National's voters are over 40. And so for them, Labor's housing policies aren't really going to swing them towards Labor and away from National. But for younger voters, it is. However, younger voters, as we know, we have trouble getting them to turn out. So for Labor to focus on housing isn't necessarily going to be the game changer.
All right, we will leave that there. After the break, Helen Clark